Everyone, there's a little wind to my back, but I'm going to tell you guys a story. One that I told last week. Was blessed. I think DeAndre's holding a lot of secrets, guys. You need to ask DeAndre what it was like, what his experience was a week ago. We did land late last night, so I'm back home, getting ready to go to the credit doctor, Ken. I call him the Las Vegas hustler. So we met a gentleman, his name is Ken. Just so you know, Ken has agreed to work with me hand in hand. He's been from the car business 30 years. He's a car dealer, so he's actually a dealer broker, which means he can get you a car. If you remember me saying, that's what I do. But Ken has a lot of the same background that I do. 30 years in the business, was a GM. I'm just really excited about the team actually linking up. But Ken actually has an experience of actually going through stage 4 cancer. And he said that during his experience, he realized that God left him here for a reason. Ken said there was 30 of them. They used to travel out. He's originally from Oakland, lived in LA, used to work for the FBI for a little bit, was a Fed. He's older than I am by quite a bit, but he's got the energy that I have and the enthusiasm for life and for God's people that I have, which is something that super excites me. So when God starts bringing kings and leaders and people like this that aren't playing any games and not making any bones about it, you better give Jehovah the praise and the honor for being who he is. And that's the reason why I decided for us to go ahead and do a fast. Now, I want to go ahead and tell you something that I was able to share last week because quiet as kept, Jimmy Katsuda, a gentleman that was sitting at his home, and DeAndre is the witness for this. We all decided we're going to do a dealership, but this dealership is going to lead from Zambia or from here to Zambia in Africa. This is real. So I need you to pray with me. You can pray for me, that's fine. But God is doing some things. He's moving some doors. So just to give you an example, I went to pick up DeAndre on last week on Father's Day. So I contacted my wife and I said, well, maybe we should set what we're going to do later in the day because DeAndre has to fly out late that night. So I go get him down at the Tropicana, and Tropicana is going through some changes, or getting ready to go through some changes for the Oakland A's that are coming to town. They're actually going to tear it down. So I'm driving DeAndre out, and we passed by Spanish Trails on the way out, and I contacted Jimmy. Jimmy said, yeah, he's ready for us. We'd spend a little time down at the Africa Love store. So on our way, I'm passing Spanish Trails. I say, hey, DeAndre, my pastor, my bishop lives in Spanish Trails. And I was showing him the houses over there as we were on the highway. And we get to Jimmy's house, and sitting there was another pastor. His name was Pastor Kevin Bibbs. So as he's sitting there, Jimmy begins to introduce him. He says, look, there's a scientist sitting there. There's Jimmy's wife. There's a gemologist sitting there. And we'll get into that later. But as they're sitting there, Jimmy makes an announcement. He says, look, actually his wife did. She says, Pastor Kevin's very important. And Jimmy began to speak. He said, 20 years ago, when I owned 4 dealerships in Sacramento. Now, I know the story, and we told you the story before, but it's a lot more material when you see another dealer sitting right there. And so he said, we were in Sacramento, and we realized that we were the only 2 black competing dealerships in the city, meaning the dealerships in the city were owned by other people, other races of people. And so what they decided to do was share customers. Now, Jimmy had 4 stores. The other gentleman, I believe, had several stores too. And so they're just sharing customer among themselves. In the midst of Pastor Kevin speaking, he said he went over to Kenya. Now, over in Kenya, he had just taken a sabbatical for a month and just got back from Kenya. If you remember, Positivity gives microloans in Kenya. Some of you think this prayer thing is fake. No, it's absolutely real. God will bring the people to you who understand the process. So I'll just pin that right there. So as he's sitting there, and I'm looking at him across the table, he goes, why do our people always look to other people for resources? He said, why is it that I'm in Kenya and I have to tell my assistant, don't buy these cheap products made by the Chinese, because they're coming in and mining our materials, taking those materials back home and not employing one person from Kenya, from this country. Now, I want you to understand, for those of you who are ignorant as to what the population is of Kenya, there's 58 million people in Kenya. There's 121 million people in Ethiopia. There's 220 million people in Nigeria. And there's 32 million people in Ghana. I dare you to go look up, Google, please, how many people there are in the United States of America. There's 330 million people. So when we talk about Africa, I need you to understand that these are countries that are completely standalone. Now, remember I told you about my uncle and being an ambassador. Well, he was an ambassador of a very small country called Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone only has about 4 million, a little bit over 4 million people in Sierra Leone, 4 to 6. I don't think it's that many. But they're powerful. The reason they're powerful is they set up all of the institutions or the universities throughout all of Africa, West Africa. That's very, very powerful. So as we're talking, and I'm listening to Pastor Harris speak, he says, you know, when I was in the military, he said, I used to be in control of a $30 million credit card. I'll let that set in your spirit for a second. He said, I also had access to over $100 million in the military. And he says, why can't we see that we're the ones that we've been waiting for? So he begins to talk about his move to Mississippi and the Gulf Coast. And that's where he is now, and he owns a dealership there. And so he's already a dealer. As he's speaking, the question becomes, why can't we all come up with a joint savings plan where each one of us puts some money in every single week? Now, that question came from the scientist. I looked at the scientist. I said, oh, you're talking about a susu or a gifting community. She said, what are those? I said, well, with my family from Sierra Leone, that's something that they actually did and they stuck to. And she said, well, was it successful? She's very clinical in her questions. I said, well, Leslie Smith, my cousin, has about 2 doctorates, maybe 3. I know he's a professor. He lives in the islands, Dominica. And I said, and his good friend, Michael Fode, they call him Uncle Mike's a millionaire. I think that's pretty successful. What do you think? She said, yeah. I said, especially considering that both were just painters in college. So know this, guys, I'm not new to this. I'm 100% true to this. My question to you are you? I've seen it from the root of my soul. It's not something that you forget about. It's not something that you go to sleep on. It's not something that you fake on. It's not something that you have hopelessness over. It's something you're going to have to fight through those curses in order to get to. You are the one you've been waiting on. $1.8 trillion we spend as black people in America, yet we cry for reparations. And when the reality is our repair is looking right at us in the mirror, but we refuse to repair. That's the reason why we need to fast. So as he begins to speak, the bishop begins to speak about being born in Youngstown, Ohio. And I said, really? You were born in Youngstown, Ohio? I said, you have to know Bishop Norman Wagner. Now, I want you to understand something. Back in the 80s and 90s, Bishop Wagner, he passed several years ago, around the same time as Dr. Miles Monroe, maybe a couple of years before. But as a real promoter, guys, he's the only person I could really listen to, because this is where the story gets deep. I'm not your perfect saint. I was an angry dude in the streets, and I thought that I was going to become the next Malcolm X. Could not understand the Quran any more than I can understand the Bible, but the Quran gave me headaches. I'm not saying anything to anyone's religion, and that is your personal business. This is my story. Now, I'm an angry brother, and I love Malcolm X as much as I loved Dr. Martin Luther King. My uncles were actual black activists in the city. The one from Sierra Leone, great, born in 1921. And then Uncle Nate Sherman, I've talked about him, born in 1925. He is a legendary local of Hamilton, Ohio. I am used to having sway. Meaning your cousin's the first black prosecutor in Hamilton, Ohio. You don't worry about a traffic ticket, if you know what I mean. If you did it, one thing, but if you didn't do it, boy, I'm used to having this. My other cousin, Nathaniel Sherman, was actually an ER doctor from the Ohio State University. He lived in Dublin, Ohio. So anything from medical to legal, my family had regardless. So it took faith and confidence for me to get my black behind, and yes, I said it that way, get my black behind up out of Ohio, where I've got everything I need, and move it way out west to California and Nevada, which is why I don't have much compassion for people that fear the jump, because I left my safety, and my safety net is deeper than yours. Most people don't have that kind of safety net, but I left it. So as I left my comfort zone, I went through a lot of changes about that. But I'm sitting there in front of Mr. Kevin or Dr. Kevin or Pastor Kevin, and what does he say? Bishop Norman Wagner was my pastor. I said, man, get out of here. I said, say less. I jumped up and I gave him a hug. Now let's talk about me not being able to read that word. See, you couldn't fake it with me because I was too angry in the streets. I was 0 to 100 real quick. Sometimes I was being nice. I could smile at you, and I could equally knock all your teeth out right after I get done smiling if you cross the line. That's exactly who I was. I was very angry. And that anger actually came from my abuse. I was abused as a child. My father was an alcoholic. He threw me through walls. This is real stuff. And I need some folks with some real stuff to listen up. So as that happened, I used to just take it out on the world. You made me angry, guess what? I'm coming for you. And I have a very long memory. Some of you know this already. I actually have a photographic memory. So I can remember details from 20 years, sometimes 30 years ago. I'm not the kind of person you really wanted to mess with. But when it came to that salvation thing, when somebody showed me the path of Christ, it actually took this for me. I'm getting ready to read that book from cover to cover, the Quran. And something says, well, you can't read that book, so why don't you pick up the dictionary like Malcolm X did, read that from cover to cover. And I started reading it very slow, and in the midst of me reading it, something said, this book ain't got no life in it. You might be smart, you might be intelligent, you might be able to know every word that's coming at you, but dude, ain't no life in it. It can't save you. I said, whoa. Then what can? Why don't you go back to that word? You know, the one that every time you look at, you fall asleep because your attention deficit disorder or whatever the heck is going on starts kicking in, and you're trying to figure it out because you can read every other book known to man. You've been reading books at college level when you was actually in grade school, and you're just trying to figure it out. And eventually you come to this conclusion that God doesn't want you, God doesn't love you, he doesn't need a dude like you because you're too angry. And you saw 19, 20 of your friends get shot before they turned 19. And you thought to yourself, there's no way in the world somebody like me will live past 19. But I tell you what, you allow me to get there, God, and every day after that will be yours. That's what I told him. And so as I was reading, something said, slow down. And so I did. And now I started reading it out loud because I wanted my ears to hear what my mouth was saying. And I started with, the Lord is my shepherd. Then I went over to Genesis and I started reading, in the beginning, God. In the beginning, God. By the seventh time, I realized if you get that part of the Bible right, the rest of it will start to make sense. It's not about you and your brain and what you think. You have to remember that everything that is in this earth was created by a God, not a man. And that Bible tells you his thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are his ways your ways. They are past finding out. So guess what? Even if you max it out, you still ain't figured it out. And even if you figure out all of the Bible, in the end of, I think it's the book of John, he says that if we would write down everything that even Jesus both did and taught, this is just Christ in 3 years, we would have enough material to fill up all of the world's libraries. So it's an aimless pursuit. So what is the pursuit really? The pursuit is finding God where he is, not doubting God as much as you can. That's number one. So when you go to church, sometimes the reason why you can't put it into action is because you don't realize it's God. Yeah, you realize it's kind of God, right? It's that topical Jesus, you know, the one in coloring books and all that stuff. But I'm talking about the one that's concerned about what's going on in your life. And so I looked at Pastor Harris and I said, look, I said, man, I looked at Jimmy. I said, man, thank you. He said, why is that? I said, because you brought me him. I asked DeAndre to come to church with me. He came to church. I was watching online. He didn't confirm, so he was actually there. And I said, somebody else ministered. I said, but isn't it crazy that one of Bishop Norman Wagner's pupils is here right in front of me, and he's someone you've known for the last 20 years back when I was actually homeless. Now, here's where it gets thick. 20 years ago, I started praying for Bishop House. I didn't know Bishop House. I just saw him on a video of Bishop Norman Wagner. And I thought to myself, I can identify with this guy. The only reason why Bishop Norman Wagner mattered to me the most was, hey, what other bishop did you know actually owned a hospital, a nursing home, a daycare? I'm talking about the church. They had their own credit union, their own apartments. This was a self-sustaining unit. They owned all the houses. They owned the whole neighborhood in their block. Even more powerful, when I'm at the Mercedes-Benz dealership, because my ties go all through Ohio, I'm talking to Todd Morgan. You can look him up. Todd Morgan at Mercedes-Benz of Fort Mitchell. He's still the F&I director to this day. You can call him and tell him I said this. But I said, Todd, when I was getting ready to leave in 2015, I said, Todd, I said, all this time, I said, what good thing comes out of Youngstown, Ohio, bro? I said, you the armpit of freaking Pittsburgh, dude. Y'all on the edge of Ohio, and Ohio don't even want y'all. Y'all in the middle of nothing. If it wasn't for the industrial age, y'all never would have been a city in the first place. I'm really hazing this brother. He's a white guy. And Todd says, yeah, bro, it's terrible. He said, my cousins are still at the liquor store. They still doing the same thing. It's a definition of insanity. I hate even going there. I said, I get it, bro, but you got to go because of your family. And so I lessened up on him. And I said, you know what? I thought about it. I said, there is one person in Youngstown, and he's a mentor of mine, so I apologize, Todd. There is something, but you probably don't know him. He said, who is it? I said, Bishop Norman Wagner. He almost cussed me out. He said, bro, who doesn't know Bishop Norman Wagner? He literally supplied at least 1,100 jobs. I didn't hear this in some church message. I heard this from somebody who got delivered off the streets. And that, my friend, is what I pose back to you. I know you go to church. I see you do things, but I promise you 90% of y'all wouldn't ever help a person like me because I wasn't as good as you think I am now. I was actually bad. And I was walking a fine line between being an angry brother and choosing a life of crime or something bad and being exactly who you see now. So that's what this is all about. This is about being who God says you are and nothing he did not. So we leave that with a picture that you guys can all see. We're going to start a dealership both in Zambia and in Las Vegas, Nevada. That's why we're fasting right now, because we want to make sure God's will is in every single item of everything we do. This message is for the pessimist. You know, the one who doesn't believe anything will ever come to pass, but yet they go to everybody's church service. You can see them everywhere, but they don't believe there's any manifestation of God. You, my friend, are the worst of the worst for me, because I prayed for years, Lord, don't send me to the pessimist church. I want to go to the church of the optimist. So if you're looking for church, I need you to start looking for churches that are optimistic. They used to say that Bishop Norman Wagner was running a cult. I remember it. I'm going to leave that where it is. This man has made the greatest impact on more real lives than anybody I knew personally within my area. And that's what Diamond VIP is all about. As a matter of fact, the infrastructure of what he laid down is what I'm laying down to you. Some that knew me 3 years ago know I said I'm seeking a credit union. I know exactly how much it costs to get one done, guys. It's less than $400,000. It's not much money. If you could pull 20 people together, it would only take $20,000 per person. That's it. But now that I have Tanua, guess what? I can raise $400,000 just by going through the stair steps of the program. Started out at $150. We're looking at 50 grand. Go to, what is it, 200? No. Let me get it right. Yeah, go to 250. And it goes to another additional 150,000. Now that's 200,000. But if I pay $549, which I'm paying now, we're looking at a $250,000 loan. That's $450,000 that I can raise in the next year and a half without you. But God told me to stick with you. So if you want to be a part of this movement, I need you to move. I love you to life. You can stay around, but the real truth is, guys, we're on the move, and it's big time movement. And if you've ever wanted to be a part of something very big that's beyond you, welcome. If you're still scared, please fast and pray. God bless.